Greetings, eco-nerdlings. In this presentation, I'm going to be discussing the evolution of biodiversity. So let's get started. So I'm going to start you off with this quote about biodiversity. There is a grandeur to this view of life, that whilst this planet has gone cycling on, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. This was written by Charles Darwin, who, as you guys should know by now, is the father of evolution. So, biological evolution by process of natural selection. At this point, whether you've taken on-level biology, honors biology, or even AP biology, you should know that biology of evolution is driven by natural selection. And we have different forms of evidence that support this theory. The first one we're going to discuss are fossils. So fossils are physical evidence of ancient organisms and their survival here on Earth. They reveal what their external structures looked like. So they look at their bones and that type of thing, and based on their skeletons, they can kind of get an idea of what they looked like with all of their tissues intact as well. The fossil record is the entire body of fossil evidence that we've collected throughout all of the years that we've been looking at fossils. And only 1% of all organisms on Earth have left behind their fossils. The reason for this is that the process that has to occur in order for a fossil to be created is very, very entailed, and it has to be very specific conditions under which those fossils are created. And those conditions aren't met very often. So biological evolution by natural selection explains how life changes over time. By definition, biological evolution is how Earth's life changes over time through changes in the genetic characteristics of populations. Now, one thing I want to make sure you guys remember is that populations evolve. Individuals do not evolve. A whole population evolves over large amounts of time. So for example, if I go swimming every day, and I love swimming, and every day I go into the pool, by the end of my life, I'm not going to develop webbed hands. It would be cool, but it's just not going to happen. Nor will my child or my child's child or my child's child develop those webbed hand features, because it takes a population evolving over long amounts of time. There is no type of evolution that occurs in one species in one generation. It just doesn't happen like that. Natural selection is when individuals with certain traits are more likely to survive and reproduce under a set of environmental conditions. So you should have heard the term survival of the fittest, meaning the fittest individual is the one who's going to be most adapted to that environment and be able to reproduce and produce viable offspring. So here we have our little example right here, natural selection in a nutshell. So these birds are eating these green beetles right here, but we also have the orange beetles. However, these birds like the green beetles. So every time they get a green beetle, they're like, nom, 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 nom. Green beetle, yummy. So the orange beetles are the ones that are going to get left behind. Maybe they don't taste very good, or maybe the color scares the birds off. But they're not eating those. So over time, you'll see the population of the orange beetles increase while the population of the green beetles decreases. So here you can see a little diagram of the diversity of life on Earth. So you should know these by now. These are the two domains. We have domain bacteria and we have domain eukarya. In domain bacteria, we have our prokaryotes. And remember, pro means no, meaning that organisms that fall under this domain lack a nucleus. They also lack membrane-bound organelles. So we have eubacteria and archaeobacteria. Archaea are those ancient bacteria that are the extremophiles. Eukaryotes, or the domain eukarya, meaning that they have a nucleus. So they have a membrane-bound nucleus as well as membrane-bound organelles. They're typically larger and more complex than prokaryotes. So these are the kingdoms that fall underneath the domain of eukaryota. We have protista, which includes plant-like, animal-like, as well as fungi-like protists. We have plants, fungi, and animals. On this side, it's showing you what happens on the history of life on Earth over millions of years. So we start off with the origin of Earth, meaning when Earth was formed, and then the Earth cooling, the oldest prokaryotic fossils being found, the accumulation of oxygen in the atmosphere from photosynthetic cyanobacteria, the oldest eukaryotic fossils, the origin of multicellular organisms, and then when plants are colonizing land, the Mesozoic, which is where the extinction of dinosaurs occurred, and the Cenozoic, when the earliest humans came into existence. So evolution by natural selection works by mutations and variations. Now I do want you to remember that most of the time mutations aren't a good thing, but sometimes mutations can be good. So populations evolve by becoming genetically different. So here we have two populations of the same species, population A and population B. Now we have two mutations that occur, one in A where we get this little X mutation, and one in B where we get this black dot. Now as many generations pass by, these were obviously favorable mutations, meaning that the individuals that had those mutations were the ones that were most adapted to the environment, so they were the ones that reproduced and passed their genes, including that mutation, onto their offspring. So over many generations, you see here that we have a whole population with X's and a whole population with these black dots because those are the most adapted. However, as those genetic differences accumulated, we actually had those two populations of the same species evolve into two separate species. So those genetic variations are actually the first step in biological evolution. And this occurs through the mutations in reproductive cells. Now, we have two types of cells. We have somatic cells, which are our body cells, everything but the sex cells. And then we have our sex cells, which we also call gametes. Me, since I'm a female, I have egg sex cells, or egg gametes, that we can also call ova. Males have a sperm gamete, and that is their sex cell. So I have an egg, I'm a female. If you're a male, you're going to have sperm, and those are your sex cells. Only mutations of the sex cells are going to get passed on to the next generation. If I have a mutation in one of my skin cells, that's not going to get passed on because it's not in my egg cell. And mutations are random changes in DNA molecules. So, just what is natural selection? Well, and what does it do? It acts on individuals, and this is the second step in biological evolution. So, an adaptation may lead to differential reproduction, meaning that sometimes reproduction occurs because of choice. So, we have, for example, the male peacock. Now, the male peacock, as you guys all know, have those beautiful bright feathers. The only reason he has those is to attract the female. They aren't really good for him. They are very heavy, they weigh him down, so it's kind of a nuisance for him. But the whole reason he has those is so he can flash them and be like, hey, look at me. I'm a cool, awesome peacock. And so that's what attracts the females. So you start seeing females being choosy. The female wants the most awesome, gorgeous feather plume of a peacock male to mate with because she wants to ensure that her offspring have the best chance at survival, and that's how she chooses her mate, based on his feather plumes. Another thing that's been happening lately is genetic resistance. You've been hearing a lot about in the news of these antibiotic-resistant bacteria that have been occurring, especially in hospitals. They're called the MRSA strain. And this is the ability of one or more members of a population to resist a chemical designated to kill it. So here's our example of the bacteria. So first of all, we have a group of bacteria, including the genetically resistant ones, that are exposed to an antibiotic. Now, just to give you guys a little bit of back history, remember that biotic means life. So antibiotic is something that's designed to kill life, anti-life. Bacteria are living. Now, you also hear a lot about viruses. Antibiotics do not work on viruses because viruses are not living. So if you have a virus and you're taking antibiotics, it's not going to have any effect. But unfortunately, antibiotics are very overprescribed by doctors and very overused by patients. Another thing that happens is that you'll get your bottle of antibiotics and you'll take it, and after 2 or 3 days you feel really good, so you stop taking it. Well, when that happens, you're only killing a certain percentage of the bacteria. So you've now helped bacteria to become resistant by not taking your antibiotic for the full course. So always take your meds the whole time. All right. So right here we have our population of bacteria, including the resistance bacteria. It's treated with an antibiotic, so for example, amoxicillin. We take our amoxicillin, and most of the normal bacteria die. We have a small percentage left behind, but the two antibiotic-resistant bacteria live. Those are the ones that are strong, so they reproduce and they form other antibiotic-resistant bacteria and multiply. Eventually, the resistant strain replaces the non-resistant strain that's affected by the antibiotic, and we start getting these super infections. And unfortunately, sometimes no matter what type of antibiotic doctors try to use, it will not destroy or kill that bacteria. And a lot of people have been dying lately. So one of the case studies that's going to be brought up in the unit is how did humans become such a powerful species through the process of evolution? Well, first of all, we have these cool opposable thumbs. Lets me grab things and manipulate things such as tools. I can unscrew lids, I can hitchhike, lots of things I can do with my opposable thumbs. I also walk upright, which allows me to look around, be more observant of my environment. And I have a very complex brain. I can think and I can problem solve. I can look at something, think about it, and figure out how to fix it. How do I get from here to there? Or I have these ingredients. How do I combine them to form something else? So my large complex brain allows me to think and solve problems. That's how we became pretty much the most powerful species on Earth. So there are 3 myths about evolution through natural selection that I want to talk about and make sure that you guys know are not true. Myth meaning they are false. So number 1, that survival of the fittest does not mean that it's survival of the strongest. So just because someone has huge muscles doesn't mean they're the most fit for that environment, and it doesn't mean they're the ones that are going to be well adapted, who pass on their genes to the future offspring, and so on and so forth. So for example, just because you are 250 pounds of solid muscle, if your environment is that you have to swim, guess what's going to happen? You're going to sink. So just because you're the strongest doesn't mean that you're the most fit for that environment. Second myth is that organisms do not develop traits out of need or want. So unfortunately, no matter how much this little beaver sits here and wishes that he could have chainsaws as teeth, it's not going to happen. Same thing when I was talking about earlier about me developing webbed hands because I love swimming. No matter how many times I jump into a pool or a lake and swim around and wish that I had webbed hands, it's just not going to happen. And the third myth I want to discuss is that there is no grand plan of nature for a perfect adaptation, meaning that we're not all evolving to become some perfect magical creature that the earth has designed. So there is no one supreme, being that we're all adapting towards or evolving to become. We all have different adaptations, and all of the different species on Earth have evolved in different ways to suit it for its own environment. So we are not all evolving into one supreme species. I also want to discuss briefly how geological processes and climate change affect evolution. So tectonic plate movements, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and climate change have shifted wildlife habitats. They've wiped out large numbers of species, and they've also created opportunities for the evolution of new species to come into existence. So you should have learned a little bit about this probably in earth science when you took it in 8th grade, the tectonic plates. You guys learned, convergent is colliding, divergent is dividing, transverse slip and slide, or at least that's how I taught it. So tectonic plates affect evolution and location of life on Earth because they're moving. So the location of the continents and oceans have shifted since the very beginnings of Earth. Species physically move, or they have to adapt to form new species through natural selection. Earthquakes occur, and this causes the shifting of the tectonic plates. We also have volcanic eruptions that occur near those plate boundaries. When a volcano erupts and lava flows out, that's the start of primary succession. There's no soil on the ground, so new species will come in and start to colonize. So here is a diagram of movement of Earth's continents over the millions of years. So we start off right here, 225 million years ago, when all of the continents were one, and we called that Pangaea. 135 million years ago, the continents split. We had Laurasia and my favorite, Gondwanaland. Who doesn't want to say the word Gondwanaland? I mean, that's such a cool word, Gondwanaland. And you might see bumper stickers that say, Reunite Gondwanaland. And I might just be one of those dorky people that has one. 65 million years ago, we had a big spreading of all of those continents. And then today, we have all of our different continents. We have North and South America, we have Eurasia, Africa, Antarctica, as well as Australia. Climate change is also causing changes in ice coverage in the northern hemisphere. This has occurred during the last 18,000 years. So we always have this flow of ice ages followed by warm temperatures, followed by ice ages, followed by warm temperatures. And now that's one of the big debates of global warming, that humans are causing warming temperatures faster than they should be occurring right now. We also have collisions between Earth and large asteroids. This is how new species are formed because the climate will drastically change or the conditions drastically change. And this is also how a lot of species go extinct, such as the dinosaurs. So, how do new species evolve? We call it the process of speciation. This is when one species splits into two or more. This can occur through geographic isolation or reproductive isolation. So in geographic isolation, just like it sounds, geography, okay, it's going to happen because of a physical barrier. So a physical isolation of the population will occur for a long period of time. Reproductive isolation can occur due to mutations and natural selection in geographically isolated populations that leads to an inability to produce viable offspring when members of those two populations try to mate again. So over here is our example of reproductive isolation caused by geographic isolation. So we have our early fox population right here. All of them are interbreeding, all of them produce viable offspring. Now they start to inhabit America, and they go to a northern population and a southern population. So some of them split off, spread northward, some of them spread off to the south. So in the north, they have to adapt to those colder climates. So you see the Arctic fox. It adapted to the cold by getting shorter ears to conserve heat, as well as a shorter nose to conserve heat. It has white fur to blend in with its environment. It has short legs, short nose, and it camouflages itself. Now the gray fox right here adapted to the heat. So it adapted to that through having a very light fur coat so it doesn't overheat. It has long ears to help get rid of heat, as well as a long nose to help get rid of heat as well. It also has longer legs, and it helps all of these adaptations that this gray fox has, helps it to give off heat, while all of the adaptations that the Arctic fox has helps it to conserve heat. So now the different environmental conditions or geographic isolation that separated them have led to different selective pressures. So those foxes evolved into two different species. So if we tried to breed an Arctic fox and a gray fox together now, they wouldn't be able to produce viable offspring. Another thing I want to make sure you guys understand is that extinction is forever. We do have different types though. So for extinction, we have biological as well as local. Biological extinction means that every single living species has gone extinct, or of a specific species. So for example, a specific species of frog, every living species has gone extinct of that frog. Local extinction would be that species of frog just becoming extinct in a specific geographical region. So again, biological extinction, all of the individuals in one species on Earth have gone extinct. They are no more. Local extinction, all of the organisms of one species have gone extinct in a location. So for example, on the entire continent of North America, a specific species went extinct, but it might be still surviving somewhere in Australia or something like that. We also have endemic species. These are found in only one area, and endemic species are particularly vulnerable because they can't colonize any other place on Earth. So they can only live in this one place, and that makes them very susceptible to going extinct. We have background extinction, which is a low rate extinction that's going on all of the time. And then we also have mass extinctions. These are the really large ones that we hear about. Most often that we know about are the dinosaurs, and we know about the dinosaur extinction. There have been 3 to 5 mass extinctions over the last 500 million years on Earth. So one type of example of extinction is the golden toad of Costa Rica. It has gone extinct. So science in focus. This is something that we kind of talk about whenever we go into evolution, that just because something has evolved doesn't mean that it's evolved naturally. We as humans, because of our really large brains, can actually change the genetic traits of populations through artificial selection. So artificial selection is when we use selective breeding or crossbreeding. We can also use another type of it called genetic engineering, where we actually take genes from one organism and place them into another. So an example of genetic engineering would be taking the P-glow gene out of a jellyfish, which is what makes it glow, and inserting it into a different organism, such as a fish. If you go to Walmart right now, you can ask them for a glowfish. That fish did not occur in nature. We made it as man. We inserted a glowing gene from a jellyfish into the genetic makeup of that fish, and now the fish glows. We've also done it to rabbits and cats, as well as mice. We have artificial selection, which is when we use selective breeding or crossbreeding. This is how almost everything that goes into our mouth has been formed. Apples, pears, lettuce, cauliflower, broccoli, corn, wheat, which make up almost everything. All of those have been artificially selected for specific traits and bred to the standards that we want them. So things to consider when we're talking about artificial selection as well as genetic engineering that we need to consider as humans are the ethics, the morals behind it, privacy issues, as well as some of the harmful effects that can happen based on what we've altered. Well, I hope that gave you guys a really good explanation of the evolution and how it affects biodiversity. If you would like to follow me, you can follow me and my little nerdlings on Twitter at Queen Nerdling, or you can follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/nerdlingscience. I'm also recording video lectures for AP Environmental Science as well as AP Biology eventually, and you can find this lecture as well as many others on my website at www.nerdlingscience.com. Well, that's all for today. This is the Queen Nerdling signing out. Stay nerdy till next time.